I was gonna, when I saw Swan Song was being published, I immediately requested an in-person event. I knew this was gonna be great. Alas, so we're in the virtual world. But it is a great honor to introduce Lisa Alther. She is the author of 12 published books, including the classic feminist coming-of-age chronicle Kinflix and the dual memoir About Women, written with Françoise Gillot, the French painter. Reviewers at the New York Times and The Nation have called her a comic genius, and none other than Doris Lessing said that Lisa had me laughing at 4 in the morning. Her latest novel, Swan Song, has been called a look into the heart of late-in-life grief, divested of the maudlin, smarter, darker, better, wistful, but resolutely unsentimental. And we are doubly lucky today because we are joined by none other than the 77th governor of Vermont, Madeleine Kunin. I had the great honor of hosting her at Northshire for the release of her latest book, her memoir, Coming of Age, My Journey to the 80s, and it was one of the most memorable events that I've witnessed. Please welcome to Northshire Live, Lisa Alther and Madeleine Kunin.
Oh, thank you so much, David. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank Northshire. Many writers say that they owe their careers to independent bookstores, and I can say that too. They hand sold my books when I was starting out, and then every time I had new books, they welcomed me for readings. And now during this pandemic, they've organized these Zoom events for people whose book tours had to be canceled. So I think this is probably my 3rd trip to Northshire. So I really want to thank David and Rachel and Barbara Morrow and the rest of the staff at Northshire for hosting us. I also wanted to thank all of you out in the audience. I'm not sure who's there because I can't really see or hear anything, but I know you're out there, and I very much appreciate your choosing to spend your cocktail hour listening to us. And I also very much wanted to thank Madeleine for agreeing to join me today. We've been friends for a long time, and I, of course, followed her political career with great interest, but I also followed her writing career with great interest. And her first 3 books were connected to her political life, but this most recent one, Coming of Age, is a very warm and intimate and intense, lovely memoir dealing with love and loss and aging and death. And since my novel deals with the same topics, I thought it would be really interesting to compare the 2 modes, hers being essay and poetry and mine being fiction. So I was especially thrilled when Madeleine agreed to be here today. So thank you, Madeleine.
No, my pleasure.
The format that we're decided on was that I'm going to describe a little bit about Swan Song and read a short passage, and then Madeleine's going to ask me some questions, and then we'll trade off, and Madeleine will say a little bit about Coming of Age and read some passages, and I'll ask her questions. And then at the end, if you all have questions, please ask them via the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll both answer those questions. So with Swan Song, my main character is named Jessie Drake, and she's a ER doctor in Burlington, Vermont. Her parents, both her parents and her partner of 20 years, Kat, a writer, have recently died, and she is mired in grief. So one of her old boyfriends, Ben, from her days as a resident in New York, invites her to join him to run the clinic on a cruise ship called the Amphitrite. So while the Amphitrite is cruising from Hong Kong through the Suez Canal to Brooklyn, Jessie is struggling to come to terms with her grief over the deaths of her parents and her lover, and ultimately over her own death. And meanwhile, Ben is trying to reignite their romance, and the singer on the ship named Mona is attracted to both Ben and Jesse. So this very complicated emotional triangle develops. So Jesse is trying to deal with love, with loss and with death. And at the same time, she's trying to decide whether she can rejoin life and allow herself to love again, or whether she even wants to. So I'm going to read a little section where she first lays eyes on Mona, the singer. Ben and Jesse found seats near the back of the theater so that either could slip out for an emergency at the clinic. Jesse enjoyed the high-kicking dancers and the Broadway show tunes, all somehow connected to a plot she couldn't quite grasp. But it was relaxing just to sit there and watch and listen without having to take charge of anything. Kat would have loved this performance. She had adored all kinds of music, blues and country, folk and classical, gospel and rock and opera, everything except rap numbers with lyrics about raping and killing women. She had sung in choirs at church and at school as a girl, and had often broken into song around the condo in her off-key alto voice. Mona Paradiso, who the program said had been trained as an opera singer, came out in a form-hugging black gown and strappy heels. Around her neck was a silver collar with a green stone in the center. Jessie started. She had given Kat a collar just like that from a silversmith in Provincetown for her 60th birthday. Emerald had been her birthstone. In a wondrous alto voice, the woman began singing a slow song Jessie didn't recognize. As she sang, the emotional pitch in the room began to rise. By the time she got to the chorus, the chronically aloof British were clapping in a startled flurry, not quite approving of themselves for showing so much uncynical enthusiasm. One man whistled weakly through his fingers. A few others called out timid encouragement, as though at a gospel revival of Anglo-Saxons. The woman continued relentlessly. I knew someday that you would fly away, for love's the greatest healer to be found. So leave me if you need to. I will still remember an angel flying too close to the ground. Jessie pulled out her pager, pretended to check a message, and then whispered to Ben, sorry, gotta go. He glanced at her, surprised, as she slid from her seat and raced out of the theater. Wrenching open the door to the walking deck and slipping through it, she grabbed the railing and doubled over in the balmy night air, gasping for breath while her heart raced.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, you managed to have details, and we immediately know these characters. And I must say, there's some wonderful original characters in this book. But let me ask the most basic question. You've written so many books, you've explored so many issues, but what inspired you at this point in your life to write a book on a ship that takes place on a ship and highlights all these characters and all these places? Was there a special purpose in that?
Well, there are two ways to answer that. One is that my really deep motivation is that when I started writing it about 2016, I'm thinking of it as BV, before the virus, 2016 BV, I felt that I had become a little bit silly, that I was spending, running around in circles like a chicken with my head cut off, obsessed with my cell phone and my iPad and buying all kinds of useless junk. And I thought I really needed to do something to get back to basics. And of course, the basics are, according to Freud, are love and death, Eros and Thanatos. Eros at war with Thanatos. So that was the motivation. But of course, now that we're in 2020 AV, after the virus, many, many people are having to deal with loss and death. So I'm in good company, I think, But the other more down-to-earth reason is that I took a voyage on the Queen Mary for 6 weeks from Hong Kong to Brooklyn via the Suez Canal. And while I was on the ship, I took a tour of it, and I saw all the wonderful places for hiding a body, and decided that I wanted to write a murder mystery. So it started out as a murder mystery. I wrote a chapter, and then when I got back home and read it, I realized that I didn't know how to write a murder mystery, that there were so many good mystery writers, and it was a skill set that I lacked. So I put it away for a couple of years, and then when I pulled it out and read it, I realized that it was a good first chapter for the kind of novel that I really like to write, which is the quest novel, where my main character goes on a journey and learns things about herself.
Well, you certainly succeeded. And, there are many ways of mourning, as you noted. Jessie mourns the loss of her parents. She mourns the loss of Kat. She, at the end, the kind of glamorous, way out there woman named Gail, who her husband dies, and then I guess it is sort of a murder mystery because nobody knows where Kat died. They can't find a body. They can't find anything, and maybe that's a symbol of death too, because when somebody just totally disappears, I mean, that's what death is. Somebody disappears from your life. Why did you include Gail? She's such a wild woman, and using her sexuality in every possible way.
Well, that whole gang of sub-characters, that they are totally uninterested in the kinds of questions that Jessie is asking herself. In other words, they're in denial. They're all partying, and they're dancing, and they're drinking, and they're running in and out of each other's cabins like characters in a French farce. And I meant it for comic relief partly, but also it represents that part of me that doesn't really want to deal with death and loss and all that stuff. So Gail, in some ways, I think, was my alter ego. She seems to be many readers' favorite character. She's just a terrible, terrible woman. She steals people's deck chairs at the swimming pool, and she takes their clothes out of the dryer before they're dry, and she steals people's gowns from the laundry room, and she's probably who I would like to be, but have never been. She's just totally ruthless. She doesn't care a bit what she does to other people. And I had her, well, I don't want to do a spoiler, but she does vanish. And my thinking was, when I started to write it as a murder mystery, my thinking was, well, in fact, 40% of murders are never solved. But all these books that you read make it seem as though for every murder there's a arrest, and that it simply isn't true. So I thought it would be more true to life just to have somebody vanish and have it never solved.
Yes, there's still a great curiosity about her, but we have to accept her demise as it is. Why did you put your characters on a ship? Do you like the moving parts and the fact that they see different places? And obviously you've been to these places because you write it in such great detail.
I've made a lot of I've taken a lot of cruises. I took this 6-week one through the Southeast Asia and the Middle East, and I took a 3-week one from San Francisco to Sydney, Australia, and I've taken a lot of shorter ones. It's my favorite way to travel, or it used to be until they turned into pest houses. But because you had your stuff and your meals and your bed and your means of travel all right there, and then the ship stops, you get off and you can see interesting things and then get back on. And I loved the days at sea, where there's nothing to do, where you're just reading and you know, it's a great way to travel. But in terms of the fiction, why I put it on a ship, I think my guiding poem was that Ithaca by Cavafy, and it's about really about Odysseus as he comes home from the Trojan Wars, and he's going through the Mediterranean and having all those adventures, meeting all those bizarre characters like Scylla and Charybdis, and the giant with one eye, and the woman who tries to seduce him. So I was very loosely trying to do a play on that. And so he was on a ship. So I needed to have my character on a ship going to these different spots.
Of course, it's also, as you well understand, so symbolic, the voyage of life, and you're on a voyage. We all are to some extent, and the end game, of course, is death. Why did you call it Swan Song? Is it true that swans, when they're about to die, sing? That's what the myth says, but it's a beautiful title. It's very musical as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that is the myth. And I don't know if it's true or not, because I never got that close to a swan that was dying, but it is the myth. And I liked that about it, that Kat, the lover of Jesse, writes, she keeps journals for each of her books. And Jessie brings on the voyage her final journal, and in that journal she finds a poem that Kat was working on, and it was titled Swan Song. And Kat wrote it at the time that she had esophageal cancer, and she knew that she was dying. So she called it that because I think because she was seeing it as her swan song, her final poem. And so I liked that title for the poem, and that's why I used it again as the title for the novel. But it also had meaning to me because I'm thinking it might be my swan song. I'm going to be 76, and you know, I've published a dozen books, and at some point, I guess I should stop. I don't know.
No.
Well, you haven't, so that's very inspiring. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you. I mean, one part of the book I want to make clear to the audience is how funny you are. I mean, you have a wonderful sense of humor. I mean, the book is about death, about the end of life, about the various characters who get into lots of trouble, but it is a laugh out loud book. And I guess you've always had that capability, haven't you?
Well, thank you very much. I guess so. It's not something I work at, but I don't know. It does help the bitter pills to go down, I guess, if you can laugh about things. And I guess it also means that you have a certain amount of detachment, you know. To be able to joke about something means that you're not totally eaten up by it. But what I've always tried to do is move in and out of that. In other words, be involved and intense, but then to step back and put it into perspective. And
yeah, humor requires that kind of perspective. Also, the author doesn't take herself all that seriously, but it's sort of a nice pathway to the serious subjects about death and dying. And that's, I guess at our age, that's what we think about, even at the same time as you push it away. You can't think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise you stop living. But when I wrote Coming of Age, I felt I was entering an entirely different phase of my life. As a politician, I had to be careful, you know, what I said, what I wrote. I didn't have time to think deeply or introspectively. But
How did that feel once you started doing it? Was it like a dream where you realize you don't have your clothes on or something?
well, I did become quite personal. And just before the book was published, I began to get anxious. Have I said too much?
Mm-hmm.
Because you just sort of open up when you become personal, and you can't always entirely control it. But
Yeah.
then,
That is absolutely typical for writers. You know, I have a real anxiety state before every book comes out.
oh, really?
Yeah. Because you are laying out there for everyone to see your deepest thoughts and beliefs, and in fact sometimes you do get attacked, so it's a realistic anxiety.
I guess so. But I sort of reached the stage where I told myself I didn't have to worry about what other people think. I did worry a little bit about my family, though I didn't write about my children at all. But
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a lot about my ex-husband, who passed away 2 years ago, and I wanted to express how I felt. And somehow a door opened, and I found I could get close to that. You never get entirely where your brain and your emotions are, but you can get close.
You wrote that at the beginning of your relationship with John, right?
No, it was, well, we still had a relationship, but yeah, and then I wrote towards the end as he was getting ill,
Mm.
and
That's right. Yeah.
so, and you know, I'm pleasantly surprised that people relate to it. I was worried what people would think, but you know, books are only interesting if they are personal, and you certainly revealed a lot of yourself.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that this book was easier for me in terms of the anxiety involved in publishing it, because my parents were dead. You know, you don't think that you're trying to please your parents, or that you're pulling punches in order not to offend them. But I found that actually I was, because with this book, I thought, you know, I've got nothing to lose. I'll just say everything I've been thinking and feeling and not expressing for all these years, because I didn't want to embarrass my parents.
Right, certainly did a good job of that, and it didn't. I couldn't imagine it being embarrassing to people. It reveals two personalities, Jesse and Kat and Mona, and all their relationships and various ways of being in love or infatuated. But it's not crude. It's not. It's lovingly written.
Well, thank you. I tried for that. The first line may be a little bit crude, but
Oh, that just gives you a jump start.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you try. They always urge you to try for a first line that will make people want to keep reading. You know.
Well, this one definitely did. But
Well, my parents, you know, when Kinflix came out, they were quite upset, and my father said, "Well, I ought to take you out to the woodshed." And
really,
my grandmother practically had a nervous breakdown. She lost 25 pounds, and
wow.
yeah, and my mother didn't react badly, except after she died. When I was going through her papers, she had specifically left me some notes telling me all the things she didn't like about my books.
Well, for its time, it was a shocking book, but I don't think for now.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what young people think after reading it. But you were the first person to write about communes and sex and all the activities, so you broke a barrier.
Oh, Thank you. Well, those were great years in Vermont. Do you remember those years? There
Yeah.
was so much going on.
What do you do?
So much optimism. And, you know, we really thought we were going to change the world.
Right.
All the communes and all the political activity and the anti-Vietnam War stuff. And it was a very wonderful, heady time.
It was. Though I had children at that time, and I was what you would call mostly a housewife, but I kept up with the times through books like yours.
Oh dear. Well, do you want to say a few words about coming of age and read a little portion of that?
Right. All right, thank you. I'll read a poem called No Longer. I don't think of getting old as a total period of loss, but you do lose some things and hopefully gain some perspective. So this is: no longer will we make love before breakfast. No longer will I dream of seeing New Zealand or the Cape of Good Hope or bears in the wild. No longer will I say yes more than no. No longer will danger sparkle and safety look dull. No longer will I look at my body and without comparison between who I was and who I have become, blaming the light for the difference. No longer can I toss my hair over my face and count 100 strokes. No longer can I do without night cream and day cream slathering on ounce after ounce. No longer can I be comfortable sitting in my chair, reading for hours without getting up to stretch my arms and legs. No longer can I walk without looking down at my feet to avoid mean cracks and malicious bumps. No longer can I skip downstairs like a girl flying without feeling a thing. No longer can I approach the precipice without swaying against my will. No longer do I think ahead of where I will be in 10 years or 20 or more. Now I think in ones or twos or threes, long enough to still hunger for the food of life. No longer do I wish for the next day or the next year to come quickly, like I did the year I turned 10. I want the days to saunter like a leisurely museum stroller who stops now and then to gaze and get closer to the cameras to see the brush strokes, and then steps back for the long view before moving on. So that's one of the earlier poems in the book. But I found I really liked writing poetry. I mean, it wasn't a struggle. I rewrote quite a bit, but I didn't labor over it. It was like a faucet had been turned on and out it poured.
Well, you know, a couple of things really intrigue me about the book. One is that it's so economical. I mean, the language is just like a cut diamond, and you manage to cover your entire life, but in so few words, but such powerful words. It just was amazing to me, speaking as someone who always has to edit extensively because I write too much. But
yeah, true. I may have been a little cavalier about writing. I mean, it's not as easy as I just said, but it's not. It's a pleasure, I think, and you must enjoy writing too.
I do. I love writing. It really is fun when I'm in the middle of something. It's just so exhilarating. But what I was wondering was, did you? The book is divided so that there's a poem and then a little essay, and oftentimes the poem comments on the essay or the essay comments on the poem. And other times the link is less easy to tease out. But what I wondered is, did you actually plan the book that way, or was it more intuitive? Did you find yourself writing poems and then you saw where they would fit? And did you write the essays to an outline, or did you just find yourself writing on a topic and then you realized that it made a narrative?
Yes, it wasn't so deliberate. It was more intuitive, as you said, and it was just good luck that I found the connections. And some things I could write as in prose, and some things in poetry. And I wondered if it could work, but it seems to have worked out okay.
Well, it's really, really original and very powerful, I think. But I was wondering, are there things that you felt that you could say in poetry that you couldn't say in prose, or vice versa?
That's an interesting question. Yes, I think so. I think I can say more emotional things in poetry. I'll just quickly read you what I call a love poem. And this takes place when my husband was in what is called skilled nursing. I live in a continuing care community called Wake Robin. Each night I wheel you to your door with a kiss on your lips. I smile, my love, at you, generously, I think. You don't know how much I love you, you say. I do, I do. We formed a ritual by waving goodbye as I retreat slowly down the hall. At first, I wave with one hand in the air, and then my arms go wild before I turn the corner, as if struck by a storm or signaling for help. We wave in tandem. You are there, and I am here. The nurses now know we wave not for them, but for one another, to have and to hold the love we swore to once and forever.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, that's one thing that I see running through the whole book is you overturn various stereotypes. I mean, for instance, one of them is when we were younger and we were feminists and we thought we could have it all and have jobs and have families, and in the book you show the underbelly of that, the ways in which you felt you didn't treat your family as well as you would have liked to, or the impositions that private life made on your political career. And it's really fascinating. But the one that most struck me that you overturned was when I was about 50, I had some friends, a couple who were in their 80s, and we were chatting one day, and the man, he must have been about 82 at the time, and he said, well, you know, you never stop falling in love. And his wife looked at him and gave him a nasty look, because I think he'd just fallen in love with his secretary. But anyway, your book showed that it's not true that us older people don't fall in love, don't experience eroticism. I mean, it was very much of a gift to people our age to say those things, I think.
Yes, yes, and that's the beauty of life. I mean, the unexpected love late in life is possible, and that you never lose the hunger for love or connection or relationships. I think that I was just so fortunate to have met John and to have this, you know, romance is too slender a word for it, but to really have so much joy together.
What a gift.
Yes.
Well, another stereotype that you overturned for me was when you were talking about being an ambassador in Switzerland. And, you know, to those of us who aren't in the political life, it seems very glamorous. And, you know, you've got all these servants waiting on you, making your dinner parties for you. And you've got these fancy clothes and silver and china and brilliant guests. And you showed how lonely it can be, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I had recently gotten divorced, and you know, there's certain times when you just want to be a couple, and entertaining is one of them. And just when you come home after a day's work, to have someone to talk to. But eventually, I made friends in Switzerland, but at times it was hard. And I don't know why I wrote about that part. I should have written more about the dinner parties, and and it would have been maybe more entertaining. I remember.
No, I thought it was fascinating, you know, trying to imagine what it is really like to be an ambassador in a strange country, you know, without a partner.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. I remember at a dinner party, you remind me of it, they were speaking 3 languages, English, French, and Swiss German. And I got dizzy just following. I thought, how wonderful. My brain must be on all batteries charged.
Could you speak all 3 of those?
Haltingly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could speak Swiss German better than French, and of course they spoke quickly, which made it. And my laughter usually came after the conversation stopped.
Well, I think another point to make about the book, as you did about mine, is how funny it is. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of that, but there's some hilarious things in there. There's an essay about when you bought the red chairs for your
Yes.
for your cottage at Wake Robin, and you thought it would be so thrilling and cheerful to have red chairs, and then they got there and you and John just hated the red chairs, and you became obsessed with the red chairs, moving them here and there and trying to discuss whether you like them or not.
When people come to my cottage now, the first thing they say, "Oh, they're the red chairs." They quickly recognize them as a landmark. Okay, back to your book. It was just, what do you call it, good read, but also made you think. So I don't think it was just humor, but you really had to think. And I don't know, I've never written fiction, how you shape those characters so they really stand out as distinct personalities. You know, people like
Actually, well, I think it's partly how I grew up. You know, in the South, before air conditioning, everybody just sat around and listened to the adults talk, and the adults were great storytellers. And my father was one of those. He could just make a scene come alive. And so, you know, I think I absorbed that when I was very, very young, and carried that over into my writing. But thank you.
well, where'd you dream up the woman who made little wedding gowns?
That's true. I think I read about it in the National Enquirer, which is one of my favorite source materials. And they're really, they do that. There's a whole group of people that do that. They make little gowns for aborted fetuses and stillbirths so they can be buried as humans in cemeteries. So I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Another question I wanted to ask you, your poetry is so lovely. Do you have poets that you like, that you look to, or are you self-made?
Well, I've always read poetry. I've always liked poetry. So I can't, maybe Elizabeth Bishop is a poet. I really like a whole lot. But because she's so concise and but she worked hard in her poems. And of course, oh, now I can't think of it. One of the signs of old age is you can't retrieve names when you want them.
Yeah.
But no, I've always loved poetry, but I can't say that one really influenced me the most. What about writers and you? Were you influenced by particular?
I think the writer that most helped me was Doris Lessing. Prior to that, I had been writing mainly stories, but also a couple of novels with a lot of heavy-duty symbolism. And, you know, I'd read mostly fiction, male fiction about going to war or going to sea or going into the wilderness and hunting Native Americans. And so I was trying to write that kind of story. And then one summer I started reading Doris Lessing, and I read everything she'd written up to that point. And in her early novels, she very much dealt with the details of daily life, you know, shopping and cooking and childcare and parties. And I thought, oh, well, isn't that interesting? You don't have to write about lofty topics, and you don't have to use all this elaborate symbolism that I've been using. You can use just plain, sturdy language, and you can describe what you see all around you. And if you can do it well enough, then you can call it a story or a novel. And of course, the nice thing about novels, the word novel means new. And so there are no rules. You can do whatever you want to, whatever you can get away with, and call it a novel. So it's a very freeing form, you know.
Nice. Yeah, I remembered the name of the poet that I was trying to remember. So obvious, a poet, Emily Dickinson.
Oh, right. I can see that. Yeah.
She's sort of being rediscovered, I feel. People are writing a lot more. But you're right about novels. You're totally free. But you still have to sort of stay somehow within credibility that the reader goes along with you.
I guess it's whatever you can get your readers to read. You know, I remember my first editor, Bob Gottlieb at Knopf. He had a sign on his desk, and it said, "Give your reader a break." So he would always discourage anything too fancy or elaborate, or you know, he said, just tell your story, don't try to show off.
Well, that's probably good advice, but you've had great success with your writing. I mean, Kinflix was a wild bestseller at the time, and I hope that Swan Song will be. I think it should be appealing to this generation. It's got a whole different tone than I remember Kinflix being.
Yeah, it's in a way, I sort of see them as bookends to my career. You know, Kinflix was about a young woman coming of age and learning about life, and this one is more about a early old age woman learning about death. I suppose they're almost like bookends to my career, which is why I'm thinking it may be over, because if I write another novel, it'll be number 13, and I don't think you should stop on 13. So then I'd have to write another one. So that would mean 2 more I'd have to write. So maybe I'll stop now. I don't know.
I hope you don't. You'll be depriving your readers of a good adventure if you stop now. And as you said, early old age, you know, there's middle old age and late old age. It's great. There's great potential out there.
Absolutely. Do you have questions for us, Duffy?
Yeah, well, I was going to see if anyone was interested in asking a question. Again, you can please feel free to type it in the chat. This is being recorded. If you'd like, if you wouldn't mind appearing on screen and on YouTube for a few minutes as you ask your question, feel free to answer it. You can wave your hand or do the little hand thing, or send Rachel or I a comment in the questions, or mention it there in the chat box. I have a question though to start things off for the both of you. We've hosted a number of authors since this pandemic has started on the virtual events, and it's kind of really all over the place of whether people are having success working during this time. Some are saying that their lives are just the same, and some are saying that they can't concentrate at all. What have both of you experienced as it comes to writing, at least?
Well, I have found that I seem kind of permanently stuck in a flight or fight mode. I can't seem to withdraw enough from what's going on in the world right now to live in an imaginary world. So I'm not really trying to write right now. I'm just kind of waiting it out. What about you, Madeleine?
Well, around after a month, when the virus really started getting hold of us, that first month I couldn't write at all. Then I wrote a series of poems related to COVID, and they helped me deal with it. I mean, I think one of the hard things of living with a pandemic is, what do you do with yourself, and how do you relate to the world? And am I just waiting for this to pass by and just existing instead of living in the real sense? So writing poetry made me feel productive, if that's the right word. But then after I handed in my manuscript for the book that's coming out in October, Red Kite, Blue Sky, I shut down again. So I've just recently started writing again, but it can, the whole scene we're living in can really bog you down. But then I feel guilty about doing nothing. I mean, nothing but eating and sleeping and Zooming. I have this compulsion. I still should accomplish something. And that's, old age hasn't relieved me of that completely.
I thought that was Protestant ethic.
Well, there's Jewish ethics too. Jewish guilt. There's plenty of that.
Well, I am feeling that I can't quite see how fiction can even live up to what we're living through. I mean, what's happened is so absolutely incredible and unprecedented and unimaginable almost. And, fiction would be so boring in comparison. It's hard to know what you could write, really.
Well, in the book you write about H1N1, right? Is that the right virus? But the
norovirus, yeah.
The remedy is just stay in your room. The world didn't turn upside down and the cruise ship didn't turn around because of a virus. So, but in a way, it was a little preview. How did you think of that?
I found it really creepy when the coronavirus happened, because I closed Swan Song referring to the Bubonic Plague in England in the 14th century, when half the population died, and Jesse's trying to say words of encouragement to her and Kat's children and grandchildren, and telling them that no matter how bad things got, they needed to be brave and stay true to themselves. And as I was writing it, I thought, well, what's that all about? And so then when coronavirus struck, it was like, yikes.
Right. No, the changes are, well, we don't know what's ahead, what children will think growing up, and what we are at. Now, maybe there'll be some good news. I'm trying to end on a happy note. Maybe we'll pay more attention to other people. Maybe we'll live more deliberately, enjoying the sky, enjoying a flower, enjoying a conversation.
Well, it did make us slow down, you know, and maybe get back to some of what's really most important about life. Yeah, I'm trying to think of something
We
positive.
have a lovely comment in the chat from Lynn saying that she's enjoying the vivid display of a genuine friendship between two such smart, funny, accomplished women. She says that Vermont has been blessed by both of your contributions.
Oh.
And it made me wonder about ways that Vermont has inspired both of your writing. And I wondered if either of you would like to, or both of you would like to wrap up by commenting a little bit on that.
Oh. Well, one thing that I noticed about both our books, which I found quite astonishing, was that they both ended on Lake Champlain, you know. Swan Song opens on Lake Champlain and also ends on Lake Champlain. And Coming of Age, your final essay is set. It's about the lake. And so I was wondering what that lake represents to us. I mean, to me, it's just dominated my last 40 or 45 years, however long I've been in Vermont. I've been fascinated by that lake, and now I live on it and I watch it for several hours a day. And, you know, it's just been absolutely central to my life, really.
That's wonderful. Well, I think both the lake and the mountains are meaningful. I mean, you can watch the lake for a steady period of time. I mean, we're tempted to go on and do the dishes, but you can. It's one of the things I keep telling myself: take time, just sit there. You don't have to do anything. But I think because we are in nature, not just looking at it. You know, you wake up in the morning and you look out and you see green in most places in Vermont. But I think the tempo in Vermont is a little bit slower than New York, and the pressure is a little bit slower. So it's okay to take time to think. It's okay to just stare at your laptop and wait for something to happen.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I do, and I also think the people around us are very supportive in a way that isn't necessarily true in larger cities. You know, people seem really genuinely happy when you accomplish something. You know, and so that's really an encouragement.
That's true, and there are readers in Vermont, which helps. Of course, there are readers everywhere, but I somehow think Vermonters are more attracted to fiction and to reading, not as a duty, but entertainment.
Yeah. And that back to that lake, though, you know, that essay of yours, it was almost like a baptism when you would swim in it every day. You know, you just immersed yourself in that lake. And there's something very spiritual about Lake Champlain to me. It's so mysterious. And I know that I'll immediately lose my viewership now, but I've seen Champ 3 times. So it's a very amazing lake and very mysterious and very, I don't know, it just really inspires me.
Well, I can't claim kinship with Champ, but I do find the lake a little bit like a baptism, that it feels beautiful and smooth and reviving.
I want to thank you both so much. This has been a real pleasure. Liza, Madeleine, this has been a delight this evening. Thank you both so much, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. This has been terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got lots more Northshire Lives coming up this week. All kinds of stuff is happening. Daniel Silva later on today, Jennifer Weiner tomorrow, Thursday, it's Natalie Jenner and Key Mai with The Mountains Sing. And then you were speaking about Emily Dickinson. Actually, in late August, I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but we have a two for Emily Dickinson event. Martha Ackman, who is the author of a new biography called Those Fevered Days, will be in conversation with Marcia McDowell, who is the author of a book about Emily Dickinson's gardening life. So all kinds of stuff, exciting stuff coming up. Thank you again, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thank
Thank you, Madeleine.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience.
Yes, many thanks.